Right, so here are some of the photos that I've taken with my iPhone over the last couple of years, and every time I've posted these photos, I've got a lot of likes, a lot of comments, and good engagement on Instagram. But every time I get the same kind of question: what are your camera settings and how do you do this on iPhone? How have you taken such a sharp photo or such a nice contrasty photo on an iPhone? And the secret is that there is no magic. I'm always looking into the best camera settings that I can use with my iPhone. And sometimes I've even used iPhone on commercial shoots, which were worth a couple of $1,000s. And you couldn't really tell the difference that it was shot on an iPhone or a professional grade camera. Now, I've never shared these settings and the tricks that I use with my iPhone camera ever in any of the public forum or public platform. I've shared it with some of my friends, and it has been quite a game changer for them when they started using those settings as well. But in this video, I will share with you exactly what are my camera settings in iPhone and some of the tricks that I use with my iPhone to get the sharpest shot, to get the best contrast and the best color. Now, before we start on this video, I want to explain something, that this video is divided into two different parts. The first part we'll look into is the camera settings, the actual settings in your iPhone camera settings. The second part we'll look into is basically how you can use your iPhone camera correctly to get the best contrast, to get the best light and the best color. And you will not need any third-party app for this. You will not need any third-party lens for this. It's just knowing how the camera works and correctly use it to its best potential. So let's start with fixing the camera settings first, and then we will get into how to use it properly. Right, so let's start with the settings. You go on your iPhone camera settings first, and then you go to camera. So let's look at the video settings first and then look at the photo settings. For video, I always record on 4K 24 FPS. Sometimes I also record on 30 FPS depending on what I'm shooting. 24 is a lot more cinematic, 30 is a lot more smoother. I never use HDR photo, I never use show PAL formats because I don't need the PAL formats in the region I live in. Then we go to slow-mo. So for slow-mo, I always shoot at 240 FPS because it's a lot more smoother. And 120 is also smooth, but 240 is a lot more smoother. But the file size on 240 FPS is going to be huge, so just be wary of that. Now going into the formats, I shoot on high efficiency rather than most compatible. And this is a very important one. Always have Apple Pro RAW active. And if you're using iPhone 15 Pro or 15 Pro Max, so you will have settings to maximize your megapixel usage. So you can use 48 megapixels sensor. I'm using 12 Pro, I'm not using 15 Pro. I don't buy the latest iPhone all the time. I rather buy Apple stocks every year. But if you're using any iPhone model, you'll have at least this setting, which is the Apple Pro RAW. Make sure this is active. And we'll look into how we can actually use that. I always record stereo sound, and then I always have the grid enabled. This is very important because when you are shooting, then you can actually see the grid and make sure that your shot is aligned. The level will also show you, again, if your camera is straight or not. I never mirror the front camera. And then scene detection is active, which means that the iPhone can detect if you're shooting landscape or a portrait and all of that. Lens correction is enabled as well because a lot of times there will be distortion, but then iPhone will correct that. Smart HDR is enabled, but again, that's completely up to you. Now, these are just the basic settings and getting the settings right. Now, the more important stuff we will get into is how do we actually utilize the camera settings to their max and how to correctly use your iPhone camera. Now, let's see what we will see when we open our camera app. So now when you open your camera app, you will see that on top you have the raw option, which is enable or disable. Always keep it enabled because that will shoot raw image, which means you'll have the best quality image. You will have more details in the shadows and in the highlights. And this is the one that I use a lot. This is the exposure setting. Now you can actually decrease and increase the exposure. And I'll show you how you can properly use this exposure settings and you'll get the best contrast and best color. And we'll get into that. So, but first we are looking into the settings. I never use these filters, of course, because they're ugly. And I never use flash as well. And now let's look at the more important part on how to correctly use your iPhone camera to expose an image with perfect balance of shadows and highlights so that you can push it even better in post-production. Now let's look at this picture as an example, which is Mount Taranaki here in New Zealand. Now, a normal iPhone user would go and just look at the full landscape and take a photo of it. How I usually take a photo, and which gives me the best contrast and best shadows and highlights, is that I look at the overall scenery and I will identify where are the lightest parts of an image, where are the highlights. So now in this image, as an example, I would say probably around here is the brightest part of the image, the more important part. Of course, the sky is a lot more brighter, but then we have the snow, which is a lot more whiter and the brightest part of the image, and it has got a lot of detail on top as well. So how would I do it is I would usually focus around this area. I tap my focus around this area and then take a photo. The reason is because iPhone is a lot better at bringing out details from shadows than it can ever bring out details from highlights. What that means in simpler terms is that if you have an image where you have lost a lot of detail in highlights, it's a lot more difficult to bring it out in post-production than if you have an image where you have lost some details in the shadows. You can always bring out the shadows and get more detail, but if you have lost details in the highlights, it's a lot more difficult to bring it out. Now, just to quickly show you a demonstration of if I was to take that photograph, how would I use my iPhone camera to expose it properly. Now, let's say if I was to take that photograph, I would simply tap on here just to make sure that my focus is on this sharp edge of the mountain and also on the highlight area of the mountain to expose the rest of the details properly. Always expose for highlights and tap on the highlight area of the landscape or whatever you are shooting. On the highlight area, have that in focus and have that correctly exposed, and the rest of the image you can always bring it out in post-production as well. And previously we were talking about the exposure, and I said that I'll show you how I actually use it. So how I really do it is when I tap on that highlight area of an image, I tap on it and then I scroll a little bit down and that starts to underexpose the image. That's a shortcut of using your exposure function on your iPhone. So you tap on the highlight area and then you expose it a little bit by sliding down on the screen a little bit. And once you do that, then you are underexposing the image a little bit, which means you'll get a lot more detail in your highlights area. And the shadows area, you can always pump that up when are you editing your photo or like color grading your photo. There's one more trick that I use quite often, and that is that iPhones don't really do very well when the light directly hits onto their lens. And the light usually bursts out and it looks a lot more pixelated, a lot more noisy. How I tackle that problem is a lot of times when I'm taking a photo with my iPhone, I would usually like keep my hand around the lens like this or something like this, or like just try to cover it up from the sides. It kind of stops the direct light hit onto my lens and kind of makes a bit of a lens hood, if you know what I mean. So here we have a lens hood, and this is exactly what it does when I keep my hand around the lens when I'm taking a photo. So basically it does this for the lens, and what that does is kind of stops the direct light hitting to my lens and it creates a little bit more contrast in the image. Also, it kind of adds a bit of vignetting around the image and a lot more darker areas around the image, and it starts to look a lot more contrasty before I even edit the image. The last and the final trick I'll share with you is how to take long exposure photographs on your iPhone but without even using a tripod. When I found that out, I was just really mind blown that I can actually take long exposure photos without a tripod on the iPhone, and it's actually quite simple. All you have to do is the live function that we were looking at when we were in the phone camera settings. You enable the live function and you take a photograph of any moving object. So let's say if you're taking a photograph of sea waves and the sea waves are moving, you take it on live on. And when you take it on live on, what iPhone does is records like a couple of images of the same scene. So let's say it records like 5 to 10 images of the same scene. Once you have taken that photo, simply just tap on the photo and enable the long exposure function. It's literally that simple. And it's just a hidden feature. I don't know why no one talks about it, but here it is. So yeah, hopefully this video was helpful for you. And if it was, don't forget to subscribe to the channel because I've got a lot of new photography videos coming up on this channel and you'll be the first one to know. Also, if you have any other questions regarding photography or any other specific videos you would like me to make about color grading, how I edit my photos, which cameras I use and all of that, drop me in the comments below and I'll be happy to respond to your comments as well as to make any other videos that can help you in your photography journey. Until then, have a really good day and I'll see you in the next video.